So, my husband and I rented a really old house. We had to fix it up a bit before my son came home from the hospital. He was very premature and in the NICU for about 5 months. We took down the wallpaper and painted, took down that popcorn ceiling, the whole 9 yards. The basement was very unfinished and vandalized by the teenagers that lived there before. Swastikas everywhere. We didn't bother finishing it because we didn't really need the room. I went down there once out of the year we lived there. A creepy feeling, like someone was watching you, and they were pissed. Sometimes that creepy feeling would come upstairs. I would give it a week or so, thinking that it was just in my head. And then I would sit in the car with the baby while my husband burned sage to clear it out. He says the feeling while he did so was heavy. Very angry, and he would see figures coming at him through the smoke. There were countless experiences there, but these are the two that stick out in my head. One, I was showering and the baby was in a little bouncy seat in the doorway. I opened the curtain and, just as I do, the can of air freshener that was sitting on the back of my toilet just goes flying toward the baby. If the door wasn't slightly shut, it would have nailed him. I went full on batshit crazy. I started yelling, telling them that if they're gonna mess with anyone, mess with me. He's just a baby, blah blah blah. As I'm doing so, the detachable shower head I had went flying off at me. It hit the end of its rope and swung down. That shut me right up. The second was when my husband and I were in bed. My son in his room, right down the hall next to us, was fast asleep. We had a baby monitor because he was on oxygen and therefore on a pulse ox monitor, so I wanted to be able to hear his alarm at night. So, my husband and I were laying in bed together. We usually just talk for a while and then say our goodnights and fall asleep. We say our goodnights on this particular night, and not even 5 minutes later we both hear, clear as day, a little girl laughing in the baby monitor. My husband jumped up out of bed, ready to kick some ass, but I already knew there was no one there. I was stunned. Literally, I couldn't move until finally I fell asleep. I do not miss that place. I am typically a skeptic, and can usually apply logic to a situation and figure out a plausible explanation. When I bought my house, they had disclosed reports of paranormal activity concerning the house. I thought whatever, but entertained it in good humor, even addressing said ghost by name. There is nothing concrete that I can tell you. Nothing hovering in the air, no furniture appearing on the ceiling. Nothing that shows as any type of blip on anyone's typical paranormal radar. However, the number of times I had to rationalize an event or come up with explanations for why or how something happened borders on obsessive. The typical footsteps on the stairs, children laughing before I even had children, knocking on walls and doors. Hey, it's an old house. They creak and groan, hot water pipes, etc. It all happens. Light bulbs smashed on the floor, having removed themselves from the metal base. One plant in particular would get overturned very often, and on one occasion ended up halfway across the room. The stereo would turn on at random times of the day, and almost always on a classical music station, so frequently that I would always keep one classical CD in a random slot in the CD player, just to see if that was the one that gets played. Various lost objects showing up in highly noticeable places, Like, how can you lose your watch in the middle of a completely cleared kitchen table? Yet, after half an hour of searching, there it is. But the ones that get me the most are the ones where I'm completely stumped. On the same day, every year, is the smell of something burning. It can be detected in only 2 specific, unrelated parts of the house. You can even define the limits of where you can smell it by walking around. After about 2 hours, it goes away. Until next year. The other is presence of hot spots in the house. Not by temperature, but when you stand in a certain place, you can feel something. This has been witnessed by people aware as well as unaware of the phenomenon itself. And some of the spots have a direction associated with them. When you stand in one, you can feel compelled to face a certain way. I watched a police officer get completely freaked out as he turned in mid-sentence to stare at the wall, looking it up and down, and then took 2 solid steps backwards while looking at the floor. And when he turned around, he was visibly shaken. But hey, at least there were no spinning chandeliers or dead girls climbing out of television sets, so I'm good. My house was abandoned for 2 years before we bought it. When we went for the viewing, there was a bedroom closet that was padlocked shut. Think like a barn door latch with a lock through it. Realtor said they had no key and we couldn't open it unless we bought it. Well, we ended up buying it, and priority number 1 was opening that door. After a few minutes with a pry bar, we get into it to reveal a child's play area. Bright colored walls, glow-in-the-dark star stickers and planets covering the ceiling. Checkered tile floor, no lights, no air vents, no windows. My little brother comes in. Well, this must be where they kept the kids before they died. Fast forward through 3 months of renovations, and we move in. And then we live there. The loft area has a daylight sensing motion sensor. As there's no easy way to install a switch, the light comes on by itself all hours of the day. No matter what position we put the sensor, it just randomly trips. And we just jokingly shout out, "Will you darn kids quit running in the house?" That's usually the last time that it comes on in that day. A year into living there, we have turned the creepy closet bedroom into our computer room. We leave for work at the same time each day, but arrive home about 2 hours apart. I get a call from a very confused wife one day asking why I had come back after we had left together. I didn't go back home. Upon returning from work, she was greeted by the computer room chair in our kitchen. The chair had to travel through 2 doorways, down a hallway, and a flight of stairs to reach the kitchen, seemingly by itself. We thought it odd, but blamed the dead kids. About 6 months after that, we have our last big doozy of an event for a while. We go to bed one night, to a house in perfect order. Upon waking up, we find all of our kitchen knives had been removed from the butcher block. In their place, all of our butter knives. The sharp, dangerous knives had been placed behind the kitchen sink instead. Neither one of us had moved them. We were both pretty freaked out and spent the whole day away from the house trying to sort it out. We decided that we were being unreasonable and went home to forget the ordeal. Ghosts weren't real, and they weren't actually any kids who died there. talking to the neighbor one day, and he confirmed that no kids died in that house. A grown man had. The room with the creepy closet was the room where the previous owner's brother committed suicide. When his wife left, they failed to work it out because he couldn't handle life anymore. He had cut his wrists and bled out. The previous owner kept living there afterwards, but upon finding out that he was foreclosed on, he attempted suicide in that same room. His children found him, and he lived. Later that year, our family grows. The rooms all get shuffled to make room for the baby. That creepy closet room, it gets emptied. The weird things all stopped happening. To this day, 9 years later, that room is only used for storage. My 4-year-old son plays in there occasionally, but even in the daytime, with all the lights and the windows let into that bedroom, he turns every light on. When asked why, he just says it makes it less weird to play there. I was around 16 when this started happening. I was laying in bed reading something. The room at first would feel completely normal. Then it would start to feel really icy. Not that room got cold feeling, but the feeling that it gave me, if that makes any sense. I felt really uncomfortable. Next, it would feel as if something or somebody was just staring at you. There wasn't anybody there, nor did I see a thing. But just that feeling that something was looking at you, hateful-filled, was enough for me. Often I got the feeling, and then left the room, and then just played a video game of some sort. The thing had left the room after about an hour or so. This happened about 3 times. In the same home, 3 other things happened that were really weird. The first was a shadow person. He'd sneak along the walls of my bedroom during the day. Second, we had a dog, a small one named DJ. Think something like the size of a fox terrier. One day, I came to collect something from my room. It was during the day and DJ followed me in. I heard a deep growling from under the bed. At first, I thought it must have been the dog, but I already knew that DJ wasn't capable of making that deep of a noise. It sounded like a really big dog or a man doing his best. Scary growling impression. This only happened once, but the experience stuck with me. Another weird thing with the dog was the time he was afraid to even go into the living room. Next to my bedroom, there was a small room that we use as a computer room. DJ was in there at the time, and I heard him whimpering and pacing, even growling lowly at the thing that was in the hallway. I called him, but he didn't budge. I had to come and pick him up and then remove him from the room myself. This all happened in the same place. I lived there for a few years with my mom after the divorce. Things happened and I left her at home so I can live with my dad. She moved a few months later, but I think she was the one that carried this thing with her. At my dad's, a few small things happened, but nothing like I experienced with my mother. My 3-year-old daughter talks about a guy called Mr. Longneck and says creepy stuff about it. I'll begin by saying I'm personally more on the side of a skeptic frame of mind with any paranormal experience. But enough things have happened in the last year to make me question that entire train of thought and entertain the possibility that this is legit And it's not just my daughter's active imagination. These events occurred only in the house my husband and I bought in June of 2017, which was built in the 1920s. First, in October of 2017, I was laying her down for bed, in the dark, with only the moonlight lighting her bedroom. She pointed across the room and asked, "Mom, who's that guy?" I looked for a toy or something that she could be referring to, but there was nothing there. So I asked, "What guy, honey?" She responded with, "He was right there," and gestured towards the closed bedroom door. Still curious, I asked her what he was doing, in case I could piece together some recent episode of pretend play or a toy that she commonly talked about. She said that he was hiding. I asked if he was scared, and she said, "No, he's hiding." Creepy. During this whole exchange, she was calm and chipper, not scared at all. What made it strange was that she was only 2 at the time and didn't really engage in pretend play or storytelling at that point. And as I mentioned, no toys were in sight. From there, we just had a funny toddler story to tell our friends and family that we affectionately named That Guy. This is the umbrella name that we generally use for any other episodes or weird stuff that happens around the house. That guy is pulling a prank. Next, in January or February of 2018, I was again laying her down for bed, along with her 6-month-old brother. We were doing our usual cuddle-up night-night talk when she said something along the lines of, "Now it's time for bed, just me and you and him and her." My skeptic mind would argue that him could have easily included her little brother, but at the time she was still adjusting to having a sibling and rarely even mentioned him. And he wasn't included in any of her talk that we were just having. What really was strange was her. Who's her? The only other female in this house is our cat, and she wasn't in the room at the time. Also, no toys were in the bed with us. And no one was there, even near the vicinity of her bed that she could have been talking about. A little later that spring, a new name came into conversation. Mr. Longneck. A short backstory. My daughter has this weird thing where she likes touching necks. Sometimes it's cuddly and sometimes it's when she's playing. We can't really explain it, other than kids do weird stuff sometimes. And it started before we moved into this house. Anyway, she was getting put down for a nap, and she was a little high-strung. She was doing her usual neck-grabbing thing, and suddenly did it a little rougher than usual. Not enough to hurt. And then she said in a growly voice, "Mr. Longneck, Mr. Longneck." I have never heard her use that name, and it isn't a character in any YouTube or Netflix shows that she's been watching. So I asked her who Mr. Longneck was. She just kind of giggled it off and was asleep 10 minutes later. That's when I started getting creeped out a little bit by her stories. In April of 2018, my husband found a time capsule in one of our heating vents, and we spent the afternoon looking through it. There had been a fire in our home in 2009, which we knew about, and in which no one was hurt. During the renovation after the fire, the owners at the time found a bunch of old stuff in the walls, and included it with some pictures of the fire and a couple of newspaper clippings. Among the old stuff was a pack of pearl buttons, some store catalogs from the 40s, and a small notebook with some handwritten names inside. I presume these were the names of the original inhabitants. And I planned to find the book again and look up the history behind the names, as well as the home. After all this, my husband and I were suspicious that there is something paranormal going on. Maybe these objects were keeping energy here or something. I know this is long, but we're almost done. In October 2018, I was driving to my mother's house with only my son and daughter in the car. Along the way, daughter, now 3, asked from the back seat, "Mom, is that Grandpa?" I said, "Where?" She pointed to the empty front seat and said, "Right there." I told her Grandpa was at home, as she had recently moved in with us due to health issues. There was no one around on the street or the sidewalks for her to point at either. Now, there have been minor other events that have happened, but these are the biggest ones to describe in detail. I've posted this in another subreddit as well, and received advice to encourage her further in conversation when it comes up. While we have, to an extent, to encourage her to be comfortable talking about it with us, I never pushed it, in order to avoid leading the conversation or pulling answers out of her that she would offer just to appease the conversation. One day, though, after a few times, I decided to ask her about it. Below is a brief detail of what she said in roughly the past month. Me: "Can you tell me about that guy?" "What guy? You don't remember that guy?" "No." "What about Mr. Longneck?" "Oh, yeah." "Can you tell me about him?" And various other questions led to, Mr. Longneck is a grown-up. He wears a monster clothes and hat. He is nice but also scary. He says trick or treat but doesn't wear a costume. He lives far away and goes with Santa in the sky to his house where he belongs. She says he comes to our house at nap time, which she no longer has, but generally in the afternoon. He knocks on our big door, the patio door, walks through the kitchen. Those were her exact words. And while she was telling me this, she was pointing a path from the door to one of our living room windows. I asked what he says or does, and among a few things, she mentioned that he played in the kitchen with her, with the spinny cow toy, which is one of those Fisher-Price pull-string farm toys. She never plays with it. I rarely see it, and have never seen it in the kitchen. The specific detail of this piqued my interest for sure. I also asked if he ever brought a friend, to see if I could follow up on the her mentioned earlier. He brings a friend. She's a little girl, not a grown-up, and she has yellow hair like me. She is never scared of these talks, although she withdraws from the conversation when I ask about his neck and why it's long. That's pretty much it. Thanks if you read this whole thing. I welcome any comments and advice. We have saged the house, but quite a while ago, and we plan to do it again. I think we will probably also get rid of the old items from the walls after we find out more about them, which is sad because it's the home's history. Looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. Did you ghouls like these 5 creepy haunted house stories? I like them. They're all very realistic and also very creepy. Like if Jude, my 6-year-old, came up like, "Oh, hey, I talked to this guy. His name's Mr. Longneck, and he wears scary monster clothes," I would be a little worried. Kids, it's so hard with kids. Like, I believe children can see spirits so easily, but at the same time, kids are also so imaginative. So, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you ghouls have ever lived in a haunted house before, because all my houses I live in are haunted, and I just want to hear, your ghouls' experience with haunted houses. But as always, the last video will be on the top left, the next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.